Welcome to Coffee with Jenny B. It is conversations over coffee, talking about community, connections, what brings me joy, and everything in between. I read a quote that said midlife is between the ages of 50 and dead. Now, I know that sounds a little morbid, but when you think about your third act, that's when you're retired, the kids have left the house, empty nesters. You are basically starting another phase in your life. And speaking of phases, this is typically when women will go through menopause. Now, menopause is when you stop menstruating. For most women, it can happen between the ages of 35 and 60, and it really just depends. I don't know what the scientific reasons are, why some people start early and others are later, but when you actually go through that transition or that phase of life, you experience a lot of symptoms. Now, not everyone experiences all the symptoms, and some don't experience any. It really just depends. So you can experience things like memory loss, hot flashes, night sweats, palpitations, anxiety. For me, it was hot flashes, and it would start down here and it would rise, and I would be hot and red and just sweating. So it was a difficult period for me personally to go through. Now, I know a lot of women struggle with that, and there's different ways of dealing with it. Fortunately, my guest today is an expert on menopause and midlife. She's also an expert on talking about women's issues, and she's also a professional speaker. As well, she has created a community of women in Winnipeg who have attended her workshops, who have joined her on some of her walking tours, and have reached out to her for some advice in terms of how they can deal with this transition of life. My special guest today is Sylvia Sundstrom, also known as Sassy with Style on Instagram. Welcome, Sylvia.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I'm so glad to have you here. So now I mentioned about the idea of menopause and midlife. So how did you get started in talking about or being interested in those topics?
So it was a layered phase, if you want to call it that. And it started when I was put into something known as surgical menopause. So I'll just go back a little bit. What does that mean? It's not a natural way to go through menopause, basically is what it means. My doctor said that I had a BRCA gene mutation, which gave me a higher chance of getting ovarian cancer and breast cancer. So as a preventative measure, I decided to have my ovaries out. Ovarian cancer is known as a silent killer. There's not a lot of symptoms that appear. So by the time you're diagnosed with ovarian cancer, it's already too late, or you're usually at stage 4. My mother passed away prior to that of ovarian cancer. So I decided as a preventative measure, okay, my kids are in their early 20s. I'm not having any more children. If I can do this as a preventative measure, I will. And then I'll continue with my breast screenings. So kind of two birds with one stone. They told me I would go through early menopause, but they didn't tell me what that actually meant. And the medical community, when I agreed to go ahead and have this surgery. So when I had the surgery, I literally went through a multiple of symptoms that evening. Now, I wasn't sure if it was due to the anesthetic or actual symptoms that I was going through, but the hot flashes that you were, describing there, spot on, exactly. It felt like somebody put a bunch of matches on my toes, and the burning just stopped all the way up and just breaking out into a cold sweat.
Yeah.
So there are over 35 plus menopause symptoms.
Oh, wow.
The most common one that women associate menopause with is indeed hot flashes. So.
Wow, 35. I mentioned a few, and I went through a few myself, but I don't know that I've actually experienced or even thought about 35. So can you tell us some of other symptoms that we might experience?
Sure. Heart palpitations. So again, people may associate that with anxiety as well. Brain fog is a huge one. Aches, joints, burning, itchy sensation on your skin, very dry mouth, Anything that has mucus in your body tends to dry up as well. So vaginal atrophy, you know, and a lot of women don't necessarily know that they're going through perimenopause or menopause at that time if they're symptomatic with some of these things. And again, that's again a small sample of all of the symptoms. Yeah.
Interesting. You mentioned perimenopause and menopause. So what is the difference between the two?
So perimenopause is a period of 10 years prior to you actually going through menopause. So menopause, as you mentioned, is when we stop menstruating. But again, you can be symptomatic 10 years prior to you actually going through that. So it's a hormonal change, right?
That must be a little confusing for someone who is going through these symptoms and maybe not understanding that they're actually going through menopause, or even understanding, so what the heck is perimenopause? Why isn't it just menopause?
Right.
So what can you offer in terms of, not advice per se, but maybe some information about someone that may be experiencing some of these symptoms and not realizing what's going on?
So when I speak about my own journey and my own story, what I learned was to do my own research and to be my own healthcare advocate, or to be my own advocate. So when I go to the doctor's office, I'm already armed with a bunch of questions. Yes, you can go on Google, but that is not the end all be all to all your answers. Dr. Google, yes. And there are truly educated people that you can find on YouTube. And again, take that information, but do your own research, because you know your body best. So you have to know what is your normal. And I say that all the time when I'm speaking to women about self-breast exams as well. We are also very different, but you know your body best. So if you know that something's off, is it off because of X, Y, and Z, or am I going through perimenopause? I heard about perimenopause, what does it mean? And then just, you know, go through the questions.
So can I say that when you were going through your own experience of going into, you know, surgical menopause, and you were trying to find those answers for yourself, is that what gave you sort of the aha moment that, you know, maybe I should talk to other women who might be going through something like that?
Keyword, talk to other women. A lot of women don't want to talk about this.
No.
They still don't want to talk about this. A lot of my friends don't even want to talk about this. It's like, stop it. I've gone through menopause. I don't want to hear any more about it. So I have to know my audience, and I have to know when and where I can bring up those conversations as well. It's still a very much taboo topic. And I'm trying to get these conversations out into the open, because we need to educate ourselves. And we are, you know, half the population.
Yeah.
So if you have ovaries, you will be experiencing menopause.
You know, that's interesting that women, I should say not all women, most women, or some women, I guess, depending, but that they don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to associate themselves. You know, it's interesting because I worked in as a fundraising coordinator for 2 different charities that were autoimmune diseases, and people that either had cancer or arthritis or, you know, any other autoimmune disease never wanted to talk about it. It's like, you know, no, I'm not someone with cancer. I am someone else. So they never wanted to be identified with that. But what's interesting is someone living with an autoimmune disease is a little different than someone going through menopause, because eventually menopause will end, but the disease will still be there. And so for someone not to want to talk about it and say, oh, I don't want to talk about it, or no, I'm not going through menopause, and sort of go into denial, but you're stopping something that is a natural progression for women. So how do you, like, I know you talked about wanting to reach certain audience, or talking about how you can reach certain audiences about talking about that. What have you found successful that has maybe reached some of the people that perhaps don't want to talk about it, but maybe willing to look into it a little bit further?
I think it kind of ties into the other transition once we reach menopause, which is typically in our 50s. But again, some women go through it because there can be chemically induced menopause as well. So if you are, for example, going through chemotherapy treatment, you will be induced into menopause as well, and at an earlier age than normal, right? If you are going through this phase of your life naturally and you're in your 50s, oftentimes women will associate this with aging. And I'm like, I'm half a century old, I'm aging. And I think, in my observation, that's where the two tie together, and they just don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about getting older. I don't want to talk about menopause. I just want to keep on keeping on, you know? So.
Okay. And you know what? And that's perfectly natural, because I mean, you get to a certain point, where you're not quite comfortable with being older. You know, so for myself, I'm turning 65 this year, and I'm totally fine with that. And I will talk. So when I'm teaching, I'll tell my students right away so that they're not guessing.
Yeah.
Okay, in case you were wondering how old I am, this is how old I am.
Yeah.
And so I'm embracing it because I've lived
Yes.
a good life and I'm active and so on. But I guess for some women, they still want to keep that youth, you know, because as soon as you admit that you are a certain age, I had a girlfriend who always took 5 years off her life.
Oh my
You know,
gosh.
somebody would ask her, how old are you? 5 years younger. Because she just didn't want to face the fact that she was getting older. And when you think about, you know, aging and midlife and the third act that I mentioned in my intro, what can you offer in terms of advice for women that are going through that third act of their life, that maybe have either finished menopause or maybe still going through it, that they can embrace this part of their life? So what would you say to those women?
I think just like there's mommy and me groups, you know, so if you're, again, privileged to be a mother and you don't want to feel isolated or alone, you search out other mothers that have, you know, children, so that children can play and that you can interact with the mom and you can share those postpartum stories or those early year mother stories. I think it's the same with menopause. I think it can be a very isolating and I hate to use the word, but shameful experience for some women. So I think it's important to seek out other women friends, and it's not an easy thing as you're older to seek out other women friends, but it happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm very happy to say that you and I are friends.
Yes.
And I'm glad that we met. But and I think it's important to be able to bounce off of somebody else, right? Like, hey, I'm going through this. Did you experience this? You know what? No, I didn't experience this, but my friend Sally did, or whatever. And then you kind of, you normalize that situation in your life. And then more people you hang out with that are like-minded that way, where they like to share their experiences, then maybe you can start, again, joining a club where you can work out or you can walk. This is what I was trying to do in the summertime, is just encourage movement. Movement is medicine. And again, it gets you out of all those ideas and thoughts of aging, and we can move together and we can have the conversations and not even realize that we've done a little bit of exercise, but we've also bonded together with other women. And there's nothing more special than sharing energy, that feminine energy, with other women.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. Now, I know on your Instagram account, you do share a lot of information. Actually, you're really good about posting videos of yourself where you're recently you posted about your visit to the doctor and so on, and offering advice and basically being honest and sharing about your journey of going through menopause and midlife and what you're trying to do to keep yourself healthy and active. And, you know, I know because one of the symptoms is brain fog and forgetfulness. I find that the more you're doing things, the more that your brain is staying sharp. Like, for instance, I like to do Sudoku and cryptocode and crossword puzzles because it's not just exercise for your body, but it's also for your brain. And so I find for me that really helps. Now, I know you mentioned that, you know, do your own research, and there isn't really a lot out there aside from Dr. Google, but what can the medical profession do? So, for instance, when you're going to the doctor and you're getting your physical and you're of a certain age, what can they provide to you in terms of, okay, so you may be going through menopause, and here are some of the symptoms that you may be going through. Here are some, you know, tips on how to get through it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So again, as I mentioned, be prepared with questions that you want to ask your doctor. Unfortunately, the doctors do not have a lot of time. They've got about 15 minutes between patients, and that's the reality of what's going on.
Right.
If you've established a good relationship with a doctor and your doctor has kind of seen you through perhaps pregnancy and, you know, knows your body a little bit as well, and then you can bring these questions to the doctor and say, hey, I'm experiencing X, Y, and Z. Well, you could be in perimenopause. But again, they're not necessarily educated in the fact that they're menopause specialists. Sometimes doctors will say that you might be a little bit depressed because at this midlife time in your life, your children are older, you may become an empty nester, so you're dealing with, that. You may have older parents or aging parents or parents that are ailing, which means that you're looking after them or you're running to a personal care home. You may be climbing the corporate ladder. So there may be lots on your plate. So your doctor may not look at you and go, oh, you're menopausal. Your doctor may go, do you need an antidepressant?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that's not uncommon. So that's what I really mean by being your own advocate. And there's a plethora of healthcare practitioners that you can integrate into your system. So yes, you're going to be discussing with your medical doctor, but there's other healthcare practitioners, that you can tap into for sure.
I know that there are hormone replacement therapy that can help with some of the symptoms. I know there's also natural products, herbs, and so on, such as, red clover, and that can help with some of the symptoms. But what worked for you when you were starting to go through menopause?
So for me, it was a lot of trial and error. And as you said, I tried to go the natural path. My options were antidepressants or hormone replacement therapy. Now, because I had this operation to prevent or be proactive about not getting breast cancer and not getting ovarian cancer, I felt in my gut that I shouldn't be on a hormone replacement therapy. Now, having said that, it was never offered to me to do a hormone panel. So the operation I had was an oophorectomy. So my ovaries and my fallopian tubes were removed. So I wasn't producing estrogen. My panel, I feel, still should have been done. Like, what is your hormone level with regards to proestrogen? What is your hormone level with regards to testosterone? And obviously the estrogen would have been low or nil. We do produce estrogen from other parts of our body as well, not just the ovaries. But then here's the panel that comes back. How can we normalize it or get it to a balanced place? So that's what I would do, is I would ask for a hormone panel to see what's out of whack, how can we bring this back into balance? And then all the other stuff would fall into place. But yeah, again, for me, it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of, valerian to calm myself down so I can sleep. I'm magnesium deficient, maybe I should have more magnesium. There's 5 kinds of magnesium, what kind should I use? This is for joint, so it was a lot. So I experimented on myself what worked for me. Yeah.
And I like that you said what works for you, because everyone is different.
Absolutely.
And I had actually gone to my doctor because I was experiencing a lot of symptoms. I knew that I was getting into menopause, but she's the one that actually suggested that, and that I get checked for, like, as you say, the hormone panel.
Perfect.
And I was actually low on estrogen. And so then it's, well, would you like to go on hormone replacement therapy? And if not, here's something that you can do to add that back into your body.
Perfect.
There's creams, there's pills that you can, not pills per se, because that's hormone replacement, but there's other ways that you can get that the either whatever the hormone is that you're low on. And I know for me as well, I was low on progesterone and even testosterone, believe it or not. And so, like you say, trial and error, trying to find the way that you can balance things, because really you want that quality of life. It's one thing to, and talking about hot flashes, I remember not even knowing what I could wear, because half the time, I'd have to be, like taking off stuff. And I mean, you don't want to take off too many things, but, and even now, like, I mean, even though I've gone through menopause, when I'm teaching at school, I have to have a little fan beside me. And I remember one student, she was kind of, not laughing at me, but it's like, oh, you need a fan. And I'm like, okay, wait till you are in your 60s. Just wait. But, and it's finding what works for you. And even at night, my husband likes to have it hot, and I'm just like, half on, half off, and just finding a way that you can help deal with that. I do want to touch on your experience as a breast cancer survivor. And you talk about the importance of screening and checking yourself. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So as I mentioned early on, my mother had passed away of ovarian cancer. Prior to her passing away, she actually did this test to see if she was a BRCA gene carrier, because again, it's very important to know your family history. Very important. Now, having said that, just because you're at risk doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get whatever it is that's in your family history. It's actually about 5%. It's based on lifestyle. It's based on, you know, your eating habits. It's based on your genetic makeup. There's lots there. But again, because I knew I wanted to be proactive and go from there. So I was actually screened at probably in my mid 40s, which again is a whole other topic we can talk about, because they just lowered the screening age here in Manitoba for women with dense breasts, because they typically, unless you had a family history, you had to kind of advocate again for yourself to get mammograms.
Right.
Because my doctor worked with me at the time, as well as the Breast Health Center, so I was fortunate to start mammograms as a baseline earlier in my 40s. So I was going to I was going to get mammograms at that time, but then I also learned how to do a self breast examination, and the importance of, again, knowing your body, knowing your normal, and what is normal, and how to do it. So again, when you're in the shower, it's different when you're actually looking for something specifically in your breasts, you know, in your neck, as well as along your lymphatic system here. And ironically, I did end up finding my lump. So I found my lump. I knew this wasn't normal for me. That wasn't there before.
Right.
And then I brought it to the attention of the doctors, and then we kind of went from there with regards to being diagnosed with breast cancer.
Okay, and that must have been such an emotional time for you to go through that, especially knowing that your mother had also gone through that. So how did you deal with it from an emotional standpoint?
I think with anything that you don't want to hear, there's denial. It's not really there, you know.
Yeah.
I think denial is a huge one. Then it's almost like the 5 phases of grief, you know, and then there's fear, the fear of the unknown. And then there's also fear, I hate to say it, from the medical system, because, you know, still, once you're diagnosed with cancer, they give you a 5-year survival rate, and, you know, all the things. And how am I going to be on chemo? How am I going to be on radiation? How am I going to be with surgery? Then you also have options of what to do and how to do your preventative surgery. So there's a lot going on. So you really have to go through the phases, let them sit, and then move on, and don't stay there.
That's important, because, you know, especially denial, because the more you deny it, the more likely that it's going to progress. It's not stage 1 now it's stage 4. And so now you're dealing with something even more complicated, and possibly could affect your life as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
I remember my sister she suspected she had cancer, but she didn't want to believe that it was actually cancer. And so she told no one about it until finally, and she had a different kind of cancer, but finally she was complaining about back pain, and her family said, you know, you need to go to the doctor. And of course, then she was diagnosed, and then 3 months later she was gone, because she waited too long to see someone. And for most cancers, if you have symptoms, you get going on it right away, get it checked out, and maybe you can still go through chemo, radiation, live a lovely life, live a long and lovely life. But if you wait too long, there may be a chance that there's nothing that can be done for you.
Yeah, early detection is key. That's what I talk about when I talk about self-breast examination. Again, don't be afraid of your body. It's your body. You chose this body. And so the more you know your body, the more you know, again, what your normal is, and early detection is key for sure. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I do want to mention that in my intro, I was talking about how Sylvia does a number of workshops that talk about not just self-examination and symptoms, but she also talks about, you know, going through menopause, dealing with midlife, and all the rest of it. And in terms of workshops, I know that you just did one recently. Do you have some workshops coming up that people can register, and how can people register for your workshops?
Yeah. So not yet. I don't have anything set up yet. Typically, I'm most active on Instagram. So I'll always say on Instagram how you can register. I have a website, hello@sassywithstyle. So you can always go to the website and then join my newsletter. And then in the newsletter, I'll let you know more details if there's any workshops or anything coming up. But I'm always open to speaking engagements. So if, you know, I actually met a lady the other day. She said, would you come to our book club? I said, absolutely, I'll come to your book club. So they're actually just reading a book by Dr. Ginter. So I said, yeah, for sure, I'll get in there.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Yeah. No, education absolutely
Mhm.
is key. And I know that, we've talked about that, you need to do your own research, but not knowing where to go, because I know we talked about Dr. Google, there's Wikipedia. There are sites, though, that offer legitimate information. So, like Mayo Clinic, for instance, might be one of them.
Mhm.
But looking at what you've offered in terms of your Instagram account, your website, newsletter, you are doing the work for us. And we are so grateful that you are doing that because you're providing that information. And I love the fact that you've experimented on yourself in terms of,
Mhm.
what works for you. Okay, that didn't work, and maybe trying something else, and then maybe
Mhm.
saying to someone who's going through menopause, okay, I tried this, didn't work. Can you try that? And what do you think?
Mhm.
And so it's finding out and doing some of that, not focus group per se, but maybe part of that is saying, okay, so let's get a group of women together, and let's talk about, what are we going through, and talk about our experience, because it doesn't need to be taboo. It doesn't need to be something that we're ashamed about, because it's a natural process. And the more I think that we embrace the fact that, okay, we're going through it, I'm not happy, I don't like it, but guess what? You can't change it.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And so I want to say, personally for me, thank you so much for being that beacon of light that provides us that education, that information, and giving us hope that we can get through it with as much grace and, you know, vigor and energy that keeps us strong and keeps us lively until, I guess, until we're dead.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Sylvia, for being on. And I just want to say, if you want more information about menopause, midlife, doing self-breast examinations, Sassy with Style on Instagram, and we'll make sure that we provide the information for you so you know where to find Sylvia.
Thank you, Jenny. It was
That
a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thanks.
So this has been Coffee with Jenny B on the Multicultural channel. I am your host, Jenny Sakovac.